All right, welcome to virtual workshop number 5. Meet's changed a little bit today, so I hope it works well for us. I can't actually see my presentation today. I'm having to look on another monitor, which is kind of exciting, but that's okay. Thanks to Ananda for doing a last-minute QA on the meetup today. I was a little bit slack and only put this one together this morning. The sound bites that you'll hear during the meetup were composed for me by Hannah Silver, quite a talented composer. And just a reminder that this workshop is recorded and will be posted to YouTube. Welcome everybody. So our program today, welcome to all of the local guides who have joined in. I think we've got 26 now, 27, 28. Okay, we're going to be talking about the exposure triangle today, which is essentially all about ISO and the shutter speed and the aperture and their relationship to each other and the trade-off between using the different settings. We will also talk about taking photographs of architecture and buildings because a few people asked about that in a couple of the previous sessions. So I'll be covering how to do that and keep them nice and straight and level. We've still got people coming in. We've gotten up to 28 now, which is kind of cool. Which I think that number lags behind reality a little bit. And then we'll have our special guest later in the evening. So the first thing I wanted to do was call out some of the photos from last week's task, some of the ones that I particularly liked. The photography of this one I don't think is actually here. Don't think I've seen her name pop up, but that's okay. I had a chat to her about it before, so I'll explain it for her. This was for leading lines, and I particularly liked this one because it gives you the feeling of going on a journey. I mean, lots of us have been to an airport or a train station and we've seen these travelators, and they really show you what the journey feels like and where you're going to go. That's why I particularly like the leading lines in this one. The next one I picked because it was kind of quirky. It's by Falguni, and it's an interesting leading lines image of a set of stairs in a theatre. Now, Falguni is here, so she might like to unmute briefly and tell us about this one.
Thank you, Paul. Well, this image was captured in a theatre. I was late for the movie and the lights were turned off. And as I entered, I saw the red and orange and yellow tones. So I just tried to capture it as I was attracted to the lighting and the twisted lines it showed. So I just captured it blankly.
Cool. All right, thanks, Falguni. I just noticed Jess posted a link to the Chrome extension that actually works. Unfortunately, if you're using G Suite, it doesn't because Google's banned it. They've killed it for their own Google accounts and they've killed it for G Suite accounts. I'm kind of sad about that because I liked it a lot. But anyway, that's life. The next one is by Jason. I don't think I've seen him here in the list. Unless he is. If he's here, he might like to unmute, but I haven't seen his name. No, sounds like he's not. Obviously, this is a picture of a fly on a leaf. I particularly like this for a couple of reasons. The color, thanks, Iwadi, she just said he's in another meeting. The color is quite awesome on this one, and he's managed to get in really close to this little fly. I'm quite impressed of the depth of field on this image for a macro image. That's actually quite hard to achieve. So well done, Jason. So let's get on with the exposure triangle. And we're talking about 3 topics when we're talking about the exposure triangle. And this is the science, if you like, or the maths of how to take pictures, but I'm going to ignore the science and I'm going to ignore the maths because I want this to be good for normal people. So we're going to talk about ISO, we're going to talk about shutter speed, and we're going to talk about aperture. And every time you make a choice in photography, you get a presentation of one of these things and a combination of the other 2. And you can adjust any of the 3 to make a difference in your image. But there's always a bit of a trade-off. So first up, if we talk about ISO, it's a strange name, ISO. It's also called ASA and various other things. But what essentially it means is the sensitivity to the light the sensor or the film or whatever other imaging media you're using in your camera. So if you are using a low ISO, that's not very sensitive. Using a really high ISO, it is very sensitive. Most cameras run at 100 or 200, which is really similar to the most commonly available film. Some of them can do down to about 50, and most of them these days go up to at least about 20,000 or so, some more. Shutter is about how fast the little shutter in your camera opens and closes. So if you think of the shutter like this, essentially when the shutter fires, one curtain drops and the other one follows it. So you get this effect, one drops and the other one follows. Not all shutters work that way, but that's kind of the idea. A low number in shutter speed usually means that it's, I should cover there's two different measurements. One is it's measured in hundreds of seconds or thousands, and the other one is measured in seconds. So let's talk about seconds for a moment. A low number of seconds is a fairly short exposure. Long number of seconds, the longer you get, the longer your exposure. When you're talking about hundreds or thousands, you're talking about sub-second exposures. Most of our photographs are sub-second exposures, especially if you're using a phone, because some of them are getting better at longer stuff, but generally speaking, they're not really good yet. Aperture, you might remember we talked about last week, is the size of the hole. So we'll cover this in a bit more detail, but if you've got a very small hole, say f16, going out to let more light in up to say f1.2 or something like that. And we'll cover that a bit more shortly. So let's go back to ISO. Now I've drawn this deliberately as a seesaw or a teeter-totter or whatever it is you happen to call them in your local area. And you'll notice that it's balancing on the little triangle. When you have a low ISO number, say around 100, 200, you get the highest quality and the least noise in your images. And I'll show you what I mean by noise in a moment. If you're higher number, you're a lot more flexible in what you can do. So what I mean by that is if you're in a dark environment and you increase your sensitivity to light by increasing your ISO, you can take pictures with a faster shutter speed and a smaller aperture than you normally could if you're using 100 or 200. But it does have that trade-off of introducing a lot of noise into the image. Most modern digital cameras will quite happily go up to probably about 3200 ISO these days for most of the ones that are available and recent, and they'll be quite clean. There'll be a little bit of difference, and if you zoom right in, you'll certainly be able to tell the difference. But in the kind of sizing that we used for maps and posting on the web and sharing on our socials, you probably can't tell very much, if at all. But when you get bigger, if you want to print them or something like that, you'll really start to see it. And we'll talk about noise in this image here. So a few years ago, I was contacted by the auntie of one of the members of the band GBH, who are a famous British punk rock band. And she wanted me to go and take photos of her nephew. So she got me in on the door and I went in there. The first shot, so this is the singer Colin Abrahall. The first shot is actually staged during their sound check. And even though there wasn't very much light in the venue, essentially it was black with about probably half a dozen stage lights on, which the band broke during their stage, leaving only one. But in this one, I asked him to stand still and he gave me quite a nice image, and I was able to use a very low ISO for that image. And it's nice and clean. Whereas if you look at the image on the right, which is taken during the performance, with that last light, the only one left, I had to shoot that at a really ridiculously high ISO of 25600. And you can certainly see the noise in that image. So if you look at the left-hand one, you can see that the background is nice and creamy. You can see that the blacks are properly black. We've got a lot more people coming in now, so I guess that other meeting finished. But if you look at the right-hand image, you can't say the same thing. The blacks have gone quite horrible grey. There's lots of spots. In film, we would have called this grain. And in film, to some extent, it's attractive. Not as attractive as some people who get into film these days think it is, but it is a little bit more interesting than digital. And what we get in the left-hand one, staged, standing still, great shot. But during a performance, and it could be anything you're trying to capture that's moving, you're not going to get that. They're not going to stand still for you. You're in a crowd of hundreds of sweating people on the side of a stage trying to get shots of a band. You have to capture those moments. So in this moment when he's just about kissing the microphone, I needed to capture that because it's an important part of the way he sings. It's an important part of the way he does stuff. Now we'll talk about shutter, which is how long you let light into the camera, essentially. And just before I go on to shutter, I'll have a quick check of the chat just to make sure there's no questions. Looks okay so far. So if we have a fast shutter time, it's the least time opened, and it's measured in fractions of a second. So it could be hundredths or it could be thousandths. On some cameras, it could even be 10,000ths, but they tend to be fairly specialized. If we are talking about a slow shutter, then that's more time that the shutter is open, and it tends to be measured in seconds. You normally use a slow shutter speed when you want to blur things or it's dark and you need to capture a scene, whereas most of our shots are going to fit into the fast category. The faster the shutter, the better it is at stopping motion. So if you want no blur at all in an image, you need a very fast shutter. As a general rule of thumb, and this one's a little bit inaccurate, but it'll probably work for you, at least 2 times the focal length of your lens. So on my camera that you can see behind me, that's a 12-100. I try to shoot about 1/200th or better to try and keep the images sharp. So let's talk about slow first. So we're doing a very long exposure. This is a ride at an amusement park. The night was raining, which is why you can see some little spots on there. This is a 30-second exposure, so it's covered several revolutions of the ride. It's a great thing to use at nighttime because you can really pick up your surroundings and you can capture movement and action. You need to support your camera, so you'll notice that in the image, the things like the rock walls around the ticket box and the fence and the little buildings and things, they're all quite sharp because then I'm not moving around, so they're staying still. Now, interestingly, people who are moving disappear. If you look in the bottom right-hand side of that image, you can see 3 or 4 people standing at a little concession box there, but the other people that have been walking back and forth in front of me, you'd never know they were there because they just don't register when you're exposing for this long, which is really good if you're trying to get people out of the picture, which you want to do sometimes as a local guide. So if we have a slow or a long exposure, this one again is 30 seconds, and I've used this one in light painting. So in this one, there's some steel wool spinning in a little cage. It gives you a fairly dramatic image, and it's kind of cool. Just managed to realize I can pin the presentation, so now it'll probably record it properly. That's handy. I've got a little comment down the bottom of that slide, don't be Barry. This is something that's in my local photography group. We had an outing once where someone got in the way of a shot and someone yelled out, "For fuck's sake, Barry." So from then on, anybody that gets in the way is a Barry. And you'll notice there's a Barry in this image. And because it was dark when I started exposing the image, I didn't actually know they were there. I didn't realize till later. Life's like that. So the other thing that it's useful for in long exposures, this is the Golden Gate Bridge. I did this in 2018 at Local Guides Connect when it was in San Francisco before it moved to San Jose last year. And this is done with a device with some colored LED lights that change color as you move them. And it was done with the help of a few other local guides. So essentially you just write in the air backwards with this thing and it records all of the image. But you need to do a long exposure for this because it took quite a while. Now, between fast and slow shutters, there's one I'm going to call medium, just for want of a better word. And this is around 2 to 4 seconds. It's useful in daytime, and it's for capturing movement blur deliberately. Just let someone else in if I can make my mouse work. Which I cannot. Okay, let's just go back in the slides. Sorry about that, folks. Okay, back to this one. So it's useful in daytime. We're capturing movement deliberately, and this is a handheld one by panning the camera. And what I mean by panning the camera is if you take the camera, you point it at your subject, and you follow your subject along. So as the motorbike went across the road, I'm just following the motorbike, which means that after you've practiced the technique for a while, the thing that's moving will stay relatively sharp and in focus, but the background becomes really, really blurred. And it's just a cool way of showing things that are moving. It's just a nice way of doing it. Now, if you've got a short shutter speed, sorry, Ananda, I probably should have asked you if I could use this photo, but I didn't. So if you've got a really short shutter speed, this one is 1/640th of 1 second, and it's capturing a moment where Ananda's pretending to eat a fruit. It's in daytime, it stops the movement completely, it's handheld, and the model is Ananda. One thing I do want to draw your attention to on this photo, Maria's asked, is that a tennis ball? No, it's not. It's a piece of fruit. We found it at the Hyde Gallery. One thing I want to draw your attention to is the focus is on Ananda's eyes. So that's the sharpest point in this image. And everything else is a little bit off that. Now, when I shoot people, I usually focus on their eyes. Now we're going to chat about aperture for a moment, which gives you the amount of light and the depth of the image. So we're back balancing on the triangle again. And if you've got a small aperture, now this gets a little bit weird and it confuses people. The small aperture is the really big hole, and the big aperture is the little tiny hole. So I'll cover that in a little bit more detail in a moment. But with a small aperture or a big hole, you get detail only on the subject in the image. So if you remember back in that photo of Ananda, and I'll just quickly flick back to it. Oops, if I can go backwards. You'll notice that his eyes are quite sharp, his glasses are sharp. It's starting to fall off around his nose, and his hair is a little bit fuzzy, and the background is very, very fuzzy, and the fruit's only a little bit fuzzy. So I'll just click forwards again, too far. And let's actually do this properly. Now, you also get that nice bokeh in the background, and you get the least depth. So in that particular image, I only had a bit of a sliver of sharpness in that image, which is really good for shooting people. If you go the other way and you have a small aperture, which is a big number, but the little hole, so f16 or something like that, then you get the most depth in the image and you get detail throughout your entire scene. And I'll show you some examples of that. You very quickly saw an accidental preview of that. So aperture is measured in f-stops. And I keep repeating that the numbers are big and the hole is small because it's so easy to forget and get it the wrong way around. F16 is probably the smallest that you will, generally speaking, use. There are reasons for using something smaller. You need to be a bit careful when you're going above F16 with most cameras, just as a general statement, because you'll tend to start seeing some artifacts in your images, and you'll probably start to see the dirt on your sensor as well, occluding parts of the image. F8 is a great all-rounder. You may have heard of the sunny F8 rule, where you can shoot at F8 on a nice sunny day with an appropriate shutter speed. I'll leave you to Google that one, and you can learn about the sunny F8 rule. F4 is another good all-rounder, particularly on a smaller sensor camera. So if you're on a full frame camera, F4 is going to be a fairly shallow depth of field, but on a mirrorless camera like mine, F4 is actually quite deep. And on crop sensor cameras like 1.3 and 1.6 crop sensors, which most of the DSLRs are, unless you're buying a pretty expensive one, F4 will again be fairly deep. Yes. F2.8, nice and shallow. F1.2 is extremely shallow. I was actually really happy with when the Olympus 1.2 series of lenses started to appear, because one of the things I missed when I went down to a smaller sensor was that really narrow depth of field, because I shoot people quite a lot. And we'll go through some examples of that shortly. I'm just quickly checking the chat. Adrian Lonsong has asked, when you talk about aperture in general, do you refer to aperture physical size or the aperture number, since they are opposite to each other? Generally, I'll refer to the number, because I've gotten used to them being that way around and I can deal with that. But I know not everybody can, and that's okay. So if we've got a big aperture, or f2.8, you can see here that there's great detail in the subject. So the subject in this image is the spider web. And I just liked the way it looked. I liked the really rich, warm light. And I wanted to isolate that spider web from its surroundings. So there's almost no depth in the image. You can see in the grass or the little bush, whatever it is that the spider web's on, that it blends out of focus in both directions, towards me and away from me, really close to the web. Even some of the web's not in focus if you look in the bottom left-hand corner of it. And you get some really lovely bokeh in the background. You can pronounce it bokeh, bokeh, boki. There's no real right or wrong way to do it. It's a made-up Japanese word anyway. It's not a real word. And all they're really talking about is the blurring of light that you're seeing in the background there, the little spots. So using this big aperture draws the thing that you're interested in and that you'd like to show down, and it draws it out of the surrounding chaos. So this is in a field of bushes and grasses and stuff, and you probably wouldn't even notice the spider web if you used a large numbered aperture. Now, a small aperture, with a big number, f16 in this case, is really good when you want to record a lot of detail in a scene. So this is the group photo from the 36th walk at Connect Live 2019 in San Jose. And I wanted this both to recap the walk, but I also wanted it for my memory to know who came. And I wanted to be able to see everybody's faces clearly, no matter which row they were standing in. And I wanted to see where we were. I wanted to see the San Jose sign in the background. As it happened, our tall friends in the back row blocked the San Jose sign anyway, but that's okay. Not everything works out in life. So in this one, you get all the detail on the scene, you get full depth, and it's really good for groups and scene setting. Now, we've talked about depth a little bit, and the phrasing is depth of field, or DOF, or DOF, however you want to say it. And it's a choice that you need to make in your images. Now, on phones, they generally tend to have a fairly deep depth of field all the time, unless you put it into portrait mode, because it's just how they work and how their software works. So if we look at the two images here, the one on the left is shot at f4, and the one on the right is shot at f11. So the one on the left, really only the first boat is in focus. You can certainly tell that the other ones are boats, but you can see the front of the image only. You can't really see what's going on behind, and you don't get drawn into things. So because it's all smoothed out, that chaotic effect that drags your eye all over the image in the right-hand one doesn't happen, because you can only see the first boat and the first bit of the concrete dock. Now, less depth of field is really good for people and products and things. And if we put it into a maps context, the food on your plate in a restaurant is certainly something that you want to use a very shallow depth of field for, because you don't want to see the things that are around it. The deep depth of field are on the image on the right-hand side. Great for crowds, great for events, and great for landscapes. So if you're showing off a nice park or something like that, then you probably do want to capture. Someone just commented on my beard. You should see, go and find Tariq's beard. His is better. Devonish has just asked, does focus make more sense in F4 instead of the F11 picture here? Right. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to convey, is that I want to show off that first boat, and I want to bring it out of the chaos of all of those other boats behind it. So use the shallow depth of field. But if I wanted to show all of the other boats for some reason, then you use the F11. So perhaps if you're taking a photo of a marina for maps, F11 is probably the better choice. If you're taking a picture of that boat because you like the boat, then F4 is probably your better choice. When we come into shooting people, you don't do so much of this as a local guide, but I thought I'd show you this anyway because it conveys it very, very well. So In this case, depth of field is more about creativity, and it's more about coming up with an image that you know that person's going to like. So you use a depth of field that suits the subject. In the left-hand image, that's Brittany, and a shallow, soft, gentle depth of field suits what she wanted to achieve from this photo shoot, and it suits her face, it suits her body style. The image on the other side, who's McKinley, he likes to show off his six-pack muscles, he likes to show off his arms, and he has a very interesting face. So a deep, hard, strong sort of shot's really good for him, and it's the kind of thing that he wanted from that photo shoot. So on the left-hand side, f2.8. On the right-hand side, f8. Now, composition. This is where we started to talk about some of the things around architecture. Adrian says, no, not the Brittany that we know from the local guides team. No, you're right, it's not. It's a different Brittany. When we're talking about keeping things level, now this is an image you saw in last week's workshop. I've used it again because it shows this particular feature really well. And generally when you're taking pictures of buildings and scenes for maps or just for your own memories, you should try and keep things level because it just makes more sense to your eye. And when people see it, they recognize what it is. So if we're looking at a boat, for example, going through a harbour, this is a small cargo ship. The left-hand image, it's level to the ground. The ship has a slight cant to it, but that's okay because the actual ground horizon's level. And on the right-hand image, it's taken not level. And the thing you have to ask is, do boats go uphill? And they don't, because neither does water. Well, generally. So the left-hand image makes more sense to someone looking at it. The right-hand image seems to be a quick snapshot. To me, it says that the person's careless and doesn't really care about the image very much. Whereas the left-hand one tells me that the person thought enough to level the image and make it sensible. In this particular image, if I took it again, I'd probably have the boat more to the left of the picture because that gives the boat somewhere to travel across the image. Now, when we're talking about big buildings, if you're not at 90 degrees, then they get bent and they start to look a little bit wonky. So what I mean by being at 90 degrees, if you see just under the word composition on the slide, there's a great big T. If you're standing at the end of that T, you're at 90 degrees to the things that you're taking pictures of. So you're square on is another way of saying it. So you need to be on the T and try and make sure your buildings are straight and that the scene makes sense. So in this particular image, the leading lines along the parked trains take you into the scene of construction around the buildings in New York there. That area is finished now, by the way. It's quite pretty. If you don't stand at 90 degrees, you get bendy buildings. So this is the Hotel Lindrum in Melbourne. It's a really attractive building, but I wasn't at 90 degrees when I shot that. So the building ended up slanting and it's got strange perspectives as well. And it just doesn't quite look right. Now, you can certainly fix it up in post-processing. That's the same image on the right-hand side where I've straightened it. But things still look a little bit weird after you straighten images, and you can get some really interesting artifacts, and you lose quite a bit of sharpness when you heavily manipulate an image in the way I had to on the other side to straighten it up. And that's simply because the computer can't make the data up. It has to use what's there. And when you move things naturally enough get lost. Ananda comments that some modern buildings are bent by design. Yeah, they certainly are. There are some weird ones these days. So now I'm going to hand over to Falguni, who's going to tell us a bit about mobile photography and editing. So I will just stop. I'll just unpin that and I'll stop my presentation. And I will pin Falguni, who's going to present her presentation. Okay, your presentation has come up, Falguni, so go for it.
Thank you very much. And firstly, I would like to thank you, Paul, for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm not a professional photographer. All I do is just take pictures using my device, my normal phone, and that is not a very high-end phone. So I'm very nervous and excited at the same time. So here are the basic things I would like to tell you. I have learned. The first thing is keep clearing your lens. Many times we notice that our images come out very blurry or whitish because there is some kind of dirt particles on our lenses. So before taking any pictures, you wipe your lens with a soft cloth or a tissue. The second important thing to keep in mind to over zoom your images because phone cameras are not meant for zooming the images. You can use 2x zoom, that is fine, but not that pixelating. The third thing to remember is don't use strong sunlight because it will make your pictures look very bright. Using a natural light is much advisable because using a natural light is more better because it will give you a natural color. Play with colors, different kind of patterns, shapes and textures. You can capture multiple colors in one image. It will make your image look more vivid. Focus on small details. Use different modes to capture photos like portrait mode, live focus mode, food mode, night mode. There are multiple modes available these days in phones. Play with different angles, different perspective and different look. And never forget to do basic editing if required. So here's the first image. So when you start with, just capture some basic things which you find around you. Here is a picture from my garden. Here normal mode. Get reels as well. So here's the next one. Sorry. So sunflower is one of my most favorite flowers, and I like the orange one because it's really bright. And some phones have difficulty to capture orange and red color. So here I did my focus on the details in the center of the flower. So you can see it looks more interesting. Playing with angles. This is very important because different angles will give you a different kind of look. So the first one I've taken from a side angle, and the second image is taken from a top angle. In the side angle, you can see the strawberries look a bit bigger, whereas on the top angle, you will notice they look very well arranged. So you can see the difference when you just change a little bit of angle. So this is a very important one for us being a local guide. We have habit of taking pictures whenever we go out at a restaurant. Taking pictures of a dish is easy because we can take it from a top or a side angle. But when it comes to drinks, we have to take it as in a portrait form. So in the first image, you will notice there is a lot of disturbance in the background. You can see a spoon, a plate, and the person sitting on the next table. So our focus gets diverted in the background. If we move our camera a little closer, we'll see that the focus is on the main object we are trying to show. That is the drink. So here's where to use the landscape view and the portrait one. The portrait is used when you want to focus on particular detail. In the first one, I used the portrait mode because I wanted to capture the expression and the eyes of the cat. She was all ready to attack a bird sitting on the tree, and I liked her expression at that time. Whereas in the second image, I've used the live focus mode made the background blur, and I kept it as a landscape because I liked how she was sitting comfortably. Here's the power of a background image. You can easily spot the difference between the two images. The first one consists of lightings and people and a mirror behind, which is distracting the focus from the person to the background. So in the second one, I clicked it in a live focus mode and I changed the background to black and white. And you can see the difference. The image is more enhanced now. Playing with effects. This is the simple one. You can see you will have many options in your phone to take picture. There are, so here is one is the first one is taken in the portrait mode and the second one is black and white effect. I made it look black and white because I thought it will give it a vintage look and it looks more better in black and white. So here comes my favorite image. The lines, patterns and colors, everything in one. So here we can see vivid colors, a line and a pattern. This is just a single image, but I flipped it and made it into two images to make it more symmetrical and very interesting to watch. This is one of my favorite modes, the food mode. I feel that when we capture pictures in food mode, it makes the image look more better. As you can see the difference, the first image of the cupcake makes it look more very delicious, whereas the second one makes it look very pale and dull. Both the images are taken in the same light at the same time in the same background, but you can easily spot the difference. The food mode is, Shreya, the food mode is just a new one, which is available these days in many phones, especially in Samsung phones.
Thank
It
you.
enhances the images. Welcome. So to play colors, you go and colorful things. You can just find some from your home and take colorful pictures and practice on them. So the first image is different colors, and the second one is of the vegetables. You can just take some from your home and arrange them nicely. Experiment more and do some kind of editing to enhance them. So here's the basic editing I usually do. The first, whenever we see the picture taken by us, we always get a like below the image, so that I can use to edit the photos. We have the inbuilt editing tools available in every. The first one is usually to shape and crop the image, whereas the second one is for color correction. The three basic modes are available in every phone. The first one is auto level, second one is warm, and the third one is cool. These three are the basic one available in most of the phones. I usually go with auto because it automatically makes your photo very interesting and it corrects the color on its own. If you choose the warm tone, it will make your image look, whereas one, it your image look greenish and greenish and editing is the image. You will see the difference. You will see the difference in both the images. The left one is after the editing and the right one is before the editing. So there is a little brighter image after editing, and I've also cropped a bit. The picture is not straight because I had taken it in a very crowded place and it was difficult to keep the camera stable and capture it, but I tried my best to capture it. Not a professional cannot get much details. the basic things I do. Just for my
Cool. Well done, Falguni. I'll just go back to presenting.
Thank you, Paul. I was very.
You've broken up a bit there towards the end, Falguni, but thank you very much. Now I'll just pin this presentation. So there we go. So thank you, Falguni, for going to the effort of putting those together. It is quite amazing what you can do with mobile photography now. Food mode is a new one on me. I hadn't actually heard of that one before, so that's a cool thing to learn. It looks like it's a bit similar to portrait mode in that it has a shallow depth of field and it warms up the image a little. And just judging by the chat, lots of people quite liked your presentation there, I think. Well done. So we'll move on again. This week's task, and we use all of our previous rules. We need to share to the album within the next 48 hours, please, because I make the videos at about 8 p.m. my time on Tuesday. That's the link to the file. Let me just get that out of there for you, because that would be handy, I think. I'll just put that link into the chat. And present again, so we can see what we're going to do. And it's a pretty simple one this week. So we've got our two images here, and these are the same ones I talked about before. So what I'd like you to do is learn for yourself the difference between being at 90 degrees to a building or your subject. If you can't go outside, that's okay. Find something in your house that's tall and square and try and get to the 90 degrees for that thing if you can't go outside and do a building. So please don't go and do anything unsafe. I know a lot of places are still in a fairly tight lockdown. Australia's not anymore. We're a bit more relaxed. We're allowed out. We're allowed to have visitors too, which is cool. Had my family over yesterday we haven't seen for ages. So what I want you to do is take one not at 90 degrees and take one at 90 degrees, because I want you to learn the difference in the two. Now, Ananda showed me a couple of images before this workshop. Would you like to show those images, Ananda, or do you want me to just keep going?
If you've got them handy, I'll have to find the URL again.
I possibly can. I think
the one of the two.
There you go. I've got it.
Yep. Go on. You can present it if you want.
Yeah, I'll have to paste it into the other browser because Meet will only let me share from inside my domain now, which is a bit annoying. So let me just transfer over to that one.
Yeah.
I'll just stop presenting and I will start presenting again and I will go back to that one.
Okay.
And that should start popping up about now. I will.
Good. Can you click on one of the first
pin that?
The water bottle on the left? So you see there were some questions in the previous talk about how to make something that's close not distorted. And so while I was walking out today, I decided to have a look at explaining it. The water bottle on the left is shot at an angle where you can see the top of the bottle, and the bottle looks like it's looks like it's 3D. It looks like a real live water bottle. With that perspective, the closer you get, the more distorted it looks linearly. The bottle cap looks really big. The base of the bottle looks really small. So that's a feature of, if you do a drawing class or an art class, you'll be taught how to draw a 3D object in 2D. And so it looks distorted to us, but that's how a 3D object looks in 2D. If you don't like that look, you can then think about changing the camera angle and shooting the water bottle, the photo on the right, shooting the water bottle straight on, in which case you can see from the second photo of the water bottle that you can't see the top of the bottle. You can't see any 3 dimension. It looks like someone could have taken a brush or a pen and drawn that bottle flat. And so that way you don't get the 3D representation. You're actually taking a photo in a 2D method, and therefore you're not getting perspective distortion in that way. So that was the response to one of the questions asked last week. The 2 flowers, the 2 flower photos, the one on the furthest left, it's about 1.5 centimeter, 2 centimeter flower, and that's with the 45 mil lens that I've got, and it doesn't let you get very close. And we've been talking about using macro lenses and stuff like that. And I also posted a photo of extension tubes, which, if you make sure you shop for them, they have no glass. They fit between the camera and the lens, and they're a very cheap way of getting a macro bigger image. But I've just ordered them. I haven't been too relaxed to buy them for years, and I decided, yeah, all right, I'll get them. But they're very cheap, and it's a good way to start macros with a regular camera. On the other hand, being impatient, I've got legacy, fairly old close-up filters. We call them filters, but they're actually little convex lenses. And that kind of close-up filter was popular in the 1990s. They're not so popular now. And if you get them, you can get them secondhand or new, and they're quite cheap. And that is the size magnification that you can get. So actually you have to go closer with the lens. It allows you to go closer, and that's the difference in size that you get. Yep. Over to you, Paul.
Cool. Thanks, Ananda.
Yep, that's right.
I will just change this back to what's left of the presentation, because we are pretty much done. Let me just pin that.
Oh, Paul, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Actually,
Yep.
I have been experimenting since this workshop has been started. So I faced a problem while balancing the whites in a photo. Like if we capture a photo on a white frame, or if the background is white and there is too much of light outside, like the sunlight or the natural light. So how do you actually balance the focus on the food, or instead of balancing the whites around you? How do you do that?
Light is both the delight and the endless chagrin of the photographer. So if you're shooting a building, for example, or some other subject, and you've got really bright light behind it, you end up often with a bit of a halo effect behind that bright thing. It's good to try and move where you are so that the sun is behind you, or at least off to your side. rather than shooting into the bright light. If you can move the thing that you're shooting, do that. If you can't move the thing that you're shooting, you have to move yourself. So you change your angle of view.
Okay, so that's how you avoid even the reflections of the light in the plate. Like sometimes there are reflections of light on the plate, like with a steel plate or the glass plate. Sometimes there are reflection of the light. So that's how by changing the angle, I can avoid that, right?
Yeah, generally you can get rid of reflections if you change the angle where the light's at. Now, with the bright skies, if you look at this photo of Hotel Lindrum, you'll notice up around the hotel sign at the top, it's a bright white. It probably wasn't a bright white day. It was probably a blue sky. And if you see a photographer that's got a really lovely bright blue sky, that was probably shot in the morning or the afternoon rather than right in the middle of the day, and the sun's behind them. So when the sun's behind you, you tend to see the proper color of the sky. Well, not that the sky actually is blue, it's refraction, or whichever one it is. But you'll see the nice color, whereas if the sun's overhead or if the sun's in front of you, you'll get a blown out white sky. So I might cover that a bit more in a future episode, if you like.
Yeah, thank you for.
We have come into question time, so I'll just unpin this presentation, and we're actually finished on time. That's amazing. So I'll just stop proceeding to everybody so you can see me chat to you, and I'll try and set this thing up so I can see everybody, even though I can't have that plug in anymore. It makes me sad. So has anybody got any questions this week?
I have. Can I ask?
Sure.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to find out, are there some accessories that you can add to your mobile device to enable you capture great photos?
The great photos more come from you than from your device. You certainly can get lenses which can accentuate different things for your phone. So you can get little clip-on lenses that will let you do macro, or they'll let you zoom in on an image to some extent. So you can do that. You can also have a look at the software. So my favorite mobile editor is Snapseed, and that lets you do lots and lots of things to the image that will help you. But the best thing that you can do is learn the simple tricks of being a photographer. Now, you hear lots of people call them rules, and when we talked about one earlier in this series, the rule of thirds, it's really a trick. It's not so much a rule. So if you start to learn those tricks, and we're learning some of them in our sessions so far, then you'll become a better photographer and you'll just have better images because you make them better. Hopefully that helps. Are there any other questions? Have you got another one, Andrew?
No, I just wanted to say thanks. Clear.
No worries. Awade's just asked me to explain the rule of thirds again. So I haven't got a slide for that anymore. But essentially, if you're looking at a scene, see, Adrian, if you're looking at a scene, then if you divide that scene into thirds, vertically and horizontally, and try and balance the parts of your image. So if you've got the side wall of a building, put it on one of the third lines. If you've got the a person's face, put that onto an intersection in the third lines. And yes, grid lines, that's right, Awadi. That will help you to compose your images. And it's a good way for both people who are just starting out and professional photographers to actually think about their imagery. The rule of thirds never really goes away, it just gets more complex. You can get into different kinds of thirds where you've got diagonal lines and spirals and all sorts of things. But the basic one with the grid, that's the simplest one, and it's the one that makes the most sense for most images. Hopefully that helped. Any other questions?
Hi, Paul. I've got one, but
Yeah.
it's off the topic, kind of. I wanted to ask you a long time ago about it. I saw your picture from New York when you went before Connect Live, and you took a lot of pictures of people on the street. And
Yeah,
I wanted,
I did.
yeah, I love them. But I wanted to ask you, do you ask people if they don't mind to take a picture of them, or you just, have this site? Is it okay? Or how do you do that? Because I'm always very, shy, I guess. I think it's a kind of rude, in my opinion, to take this kind of picture, so I avoid them. But I love yours.
No, it's a really good question. So that's a genre of photography called street photography. Ananda is another street person. He loves doing it as well. And there's two ways to do it. If you want to do completely candid photographs, then the people you are photographing really can't know that you're doing it, because if they know, they will change and they will behave differently. It's really rare for someone to say no if you do ask them. There's a guy in our group, Frank, who asks people all the time and they nearly always say yes. So it's rare for someone to say no if you do decide to do that. And that's a good way to get into street photography if you're a little bit worried about it. The other good way to get into street photography is liquid courage. It's really good. And what I'd suggest you do, the first thing I'd suggest is check your local laws. In Australia and in America and in most of Europe, it's legal. So most of the EU countries, it's legal. You do need to be a little bit careful though, because there are privacy connotations. The way it works in Australia, if the person expects you to be, or they have an expectation that they're not in private. So if they're walking down the street, if they're in the front of a shop window, if they're sitting in a bar or something like that, they don't really have an expectation of being private. But if they're in their own house and looking out the window, then they have an expectation that they're in private. Or maybe there's a couple of people who are being very friendly with each other in a bush. They have an expectation that they're in private, so you can't shoot them.
Okay.
Now, some areas have different restrictions. So Melbourne beaches don't have any photography restrictions that I'm aware of, but you might want to just be careful how you shoot there, because you don't want to upset someone. But I know in Sydney, on Bondi Beach, for example, they actually have a local law that they can confiscate your data cards if you take pictures on Bondi Beach.
Oh,
which is weird, because we see thousands of pictures of Bondi Beach on Instagram all the time. So they don't seem to care about phones. It's only cameras they seem to care about. So it depends where you are. So check your local laws and make sure it is actually allowed. I would start out using a longer lens so that you don't need to be near the people to shoot the candid photos.
Okay, because okay.
Yep. And
yeah,
as you,
I had this, sorry.
it's all right. As you get more used to it, you can put on a shorter lens. So for true street photography, and I shouldn't really put it in those terms, but there are very anal retentive street photographers, let's put it that way. They'll only shoot with a 35mm lens on a full frame device because they think that's the way they should do it. They usually also wear a little beret because they're like that. I can see Ananda nodding. He knows exactly who I'm talking about.
And tight pants.
Yeah, that's true as well. And often check pants.
Yes.
Okay.
There's street photography is a genre of photography, just like landscape, just like food photography and all that. And so for landscape, people have got used to saying, "Oh, if you're a landscape photographer, there are things that you can get. You can sell your photographs and hang them in an exhibition." So there's a bit of respectability for landscape photography. Street photography is very impromptu. It's very personal. And there are people who want to make it marketable. They want to make it something that you can sell. And so people come up with all kinds of rules for street photography when there are actually no rules. And so, like Paul was saying, some people say, no, you can't be a street photographer if you use a long lens. That's cheating. You need to go up to someone and shoot them within 1 meter of their face. Then you're a real street photographer. So they're making up these rules.
You're probably also getting punched in the head.
But there's what was his name? The guy, Greg. Is it Greg? Remember Greg?
The one that shoots people with flash right in front of their head.
Oh no. You remember him? So there are ways to personalize street photography to what you are. There are lots of workshops on street photography, and so you can pay thousands of dollars to go out with a celebrity street photographer. There are celebrities, street photographers in Europe, in America, in India. There are famous ones, and they run workshops, and that's the way they make money. They teach you how to do street photography. But at the end of the day, street photography isn't like taking a landscape. It's your connection to the person. You're taking a photo of the person. You have to emotionally connect to the person. If you have to communicate with them, you have to show honesty and all that to them, and they have to see that coming from you. So if you feel that you're doing something funny in your photo, they can feel you're doing something funny in the photo.
Yeah,
and that's the difference between street photography and landscape. So there are different ways that people do it. One way that one of our members did was he cut out red cardboard hearts, and then he would have a pack and he would hold it in his hand. And when he met someone who he felt was interesting and all that, one way to break the ice, it's very scary to go up to a stranger and say, "Can I take your photo?" But what this device is, he takes the heart, he goes up to you and he says, "I'm doing a project about people I like to see, about sharing friendship and all that. So would you like to hold this heart for me? And I will take a photo of you and I will send the photo to you if you want it." So with something in your hand that you give to them, it's a way of breaking the ice and saying, "Hey, I'd like a conversation with you. I'd like to exchange some heart to heart and some honesty with you. And you get rewarded by a photo and I get rewarded by taking a photo." Yeah, so that's one way. And it's not the only way. There are other people do it in other ways. Paul?
Yeah, definitely. There's lots of different ways. Ollie pointed out, I think he jokingly put shot with a Leica. A lot of people go out and buy a $10,000 Leica camera and thinks it turned them into an instant street photographer, which is always kind of funny. They're a special breed into themselves, Leica people. But you know, just check what your local laws are. You're in Poland, I think.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah. So just find out what your laws are and whether you're allowed to do it for a start. I think Stuart pointed out that some people in Germany are a bit sensitive to being photographed. I do know someone else who lives in Berlin and he finds that as well. He's actually reverted from being a candid street photographer to always asking permission. And part of that in the EU, you've got to be a little bit careful of GDPR because people in the EU do have a right to be forgotten. So if you publish an image of theirs and they want you to take it down, you actually have to. Because they can serve you with the GDPR and then you can get fined if you don't do it. There was a case recently of a grandmother who was received a demand from a family to take pictures of her grandkids off Facebook and she didn't and she was fined. So it's the first time I've actually seen an outcome where an individual has been, but you certainly can. So be a little bit careful in the EU.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul and Ananda. No
worries. I did see someone asked if they're looking to buy a camera, what aperture should they look for? Generally speaking, I would prefer to get an exchangeable lens camera, which all that means is you can take the lens off and put a different one on. I've only got one here at the moment, so I can't put a different one on. But if you do that, then buy whatever lens you can afford. Because as you develop as a photographer, if you want a brighter lens, so that's a bigger hole, smaller aperture number, you can always buy another lens. So actually, I do have another one sitting here. This one is my favorite lens for people. It's a 45mm lens. So on my camera, it equates to a 90 because it's a 2x crop factor, and it's f1.2. So it's really wide open. It's really bright. But because it's effectively a 90mm lens, you don't tend to be as close to the person that you're shooting as you might want to be to convey intimacy with a person. So I think that's one of the things, and Nanda touched on that briefly in the street photography, and you have an emotional exchange with the person. I find sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. It depends whether they spot you or not. And generally, if someone does spot you and you've taken a street photography, just smile, because they'll see that you're relatively harmless after that. Falguni has mentioned that airports and shops, and someone else mentioned train stations, are restricted for photography. In a lot of countries they are. I know in New York they're actually quite sensitive about that if you've got a camera, but if you've got a phone they don't seem to care, which is a little bit weird, because these days what you can do with a camera and what you can do with a phone is so similar now. Rosie's asked which company is best. Really none of them. You'll open a religious debate if you start talking about the manufacturers of cameras. They all do the same thing. So choosing a camera brand is more about choosing one that's got features in a price bracket that you can afford. So I think everybody knows what I shoot with, but I'm not saying that's the best camera in the world, because they're not, but they're really good for their price bracket. Are there any other questions tonight? No? Cool. Well, we might just finish up then. So I did pop a feedback link into the chat. So if you could do that, and I'll paste that in again. And I'll also paste in the link to the album for your task photos. So everybody remember what the task is? I see a couple of people shaking their heads. All right, let me present again and I'll go back to the task and then we'll be able to finish up. So I'll just start my presentation back up again and pick the right tab. And I'll just pin that, because I have a faint suspicion if I don't pin up in the video. There we go. And I'll just go backwards on the presentation. So our task is be on the T. So if I just flick back very quickly, there's our T. So you want to be at 90 degrees to the building. So you want to be at the base of the T where it says U. And you want to make sure that the buildings are nice and straight and that your image makes sense. So try and keep it level with the ground as well. Now, whoops, sorry about all the beeps. I want to see those images in the next 48 hours, if I could. And if you're not allowed to go outside at the moment, please don't. So I'll just stop presenting that again. Please don't head out if you're not allowed to take this image. You can probably shoot it from a window if you've got access to a window and do the same sort of thing. So you might shoot the angle from one window and then go to a different window that's facing in the same direction and shoot from there. Or you can do it with something inside. So we saw Ananda's water bottle. That would be fine. Water bottle would work quite well. Just about anything that's a little bit tall, then in relation to the frame of the image that you're doing will work. So are there any more questions this evening? And if not, we'll wrap it up. We'll finish this one more or less on time. This is amazing. Someone asked, can we try a toy tower? Yes, of course you can. Yep, definitely. That was Falguni who asked that. And Yash says that she's still in a containment zone. So that's okay.
Hey, Paul, good afternoon. Anil here.
Hello, Anil. It wouldn't be a meetup if you didn't ask a question.
See, you're talking about the talking big thing, big building and all. The minute thing about your toys in your hand kind of thing, small toys and all, about the how to take minute pictures in such a way that it should be visible and liked by people. And what is the difference between a common picture like and the Google like? Both the artificial intelligence difference.
How do you get your pictures liked by other people? Well, you have to publish them for a start, so you need to put them on social media or maps or something like that. And if people like them, they'll just do it. Is there a particular way to take pictures to get people to like them? No, not really. You'll tend to collect followers on socials that like what you do. So in my Instagram, for example, I actually divide it up across 3 different accounts. So I've got my general one where all my local guide stuff is and family photos and general bits and pieces. And I've got specialty ones for toy photography and for photography of people. And I have noticed that since splitting them, my followers are a bit more stable. So if I started posting lots of toy photos, for example, to my main one, then I would start losing followers because there were a lot of people that didn't want to see it. But now I get lots in the toy photography one and they all want to see it. The people photography can be confronting for some people. So when I was sharing people photographs into my general media there, not everybody takes that well. Whereas sharing it into a dedicated account, only the people that actually come to that account know it's there and they know what to expect. Hopefully that helps answer your question.
Thank you, Paul. And can you show me the last time recent Lego? What's in your hand?
What's in my hand is a pair of tweezers. The most recent Lego I built is actually in a different room. Oh, actually, no, it's not. The most recent one I built actually is in here. So yes, I can show you. Hang on. Meet Tyrannosaurus Rex. This took about 4 hours. There you go. And I probably shouldn't do too many more toy stuff because speaking of followers running away, everybody will hang up. So is there any more questions tonight? No. Cool. Oh, well, thank you all for coming along. So we should unmute now and do our standard local guides thing. So if you all want to unmute. It's the only time I ever get to really hear you all because being a workshop, everybody's muted. So
we can take a group picture with everyone, everyone opening, turning on the camera, and we can take a group picture.
And everybody keep smiling for 5 minutes so that everybody can take screen grabs.
We can certainly try to.
Like we did for the last time.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm going to take, so everybody keep smiling.
But before the picture, the signing of local guide.
Hi, Vandana.
Say cheese.
Local guide.
Cheese.
We'll say Paul. Say Paul this time.
Thank you, Paul, for the wonderful question.
Thank you, Rosie.
Thank you, Paul.
Well, thank you all for coming along. It's been lots of fun.
Turn
her camera on. Oh, well.
Guides on account.
It was a great.
Yep, so we're going to count to 3. And on 3, we'll all say local guides. So 1, 2, 3. Local guides.
Local guide. Local guide.
Wouldn't surprise me if it turned up in a promo somewhere.
Yeah, thank you, Paul, and thank you, Falguni.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, everybody. And thanks, Falguni, for coming in. Thanks, Ananda, for coming in to talk about things.
Thank you, Paul.
See you again. Bye.
See you, Felicia. See you, Roberto.
Thank you all for such a wonderful meetup.
It was a great fun. Bye. See you. Well done, Lisa. Cool. Take
Ooh.
care and bye.
There's an enthusiastic child. All right, people, I'm going to stop the recording now, and thank you very much for coming along, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
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 Bye. See you next week.
See ya.